10 years ago, much of San Diego County was about to become a hellscape. The disaster sparked around 9:30 a.m. on Sunday, October 21st. What was believed to be an unauthorized campfire ignited brush near Potrero, a dusty town north of the U.S.-Mexico border. The Harris Fire began in conditions that could not have been worse: high heat, low humidity, and sustained Santa Ana winds blowing in excess of 50 miles an hour with gusts up to 100 miles an hour. The three major fires, Harris, Witch Creek, and Guejito, merged into one, causing a nearly month-long battle against the wrath of nature. Nearly 200,000 acres of land burned in those fires, and nearly 1,000 of those were inside of San Diego's city limits. The sheer breadth of the flames resulted in the biggest evacuation in county history. 500,000 people were evacuated. Today, not all of the hard lessons have been learned. A survey done recently said that only about half of San Diego County residents would be able to leave their homes in 15 minutes or less, which is down from 74% 10 years ago. Let's look back at these life-changing wildfires and see what we have learned. I'm Daniel Wheaton, and this is Refocus. In order to get a better understanding of what happened 10 years ago, we have North County reporter for the Union-Tribune, J. Harry Jones. Jay, why don't you say hi to our audience?
Hi, how are you?
So, why don't you walk us through the beginning of the wildfires in 2007? When it first started, did it seem like it was going to be as bad as it ended up truly being?
There were red flag alerts out, and we certainly knew that the possibility was there. But, we'd had this huge fire 4 years earlier. And prior to that, it had been 1970 before a massive firestorm swept through the county. So I know I wasn't really expecting it. In fact, I had a company car assigned to me all the time, but I left it parked up in our Guejito parking lot. So when I get the call, I remember it clear as day. I was watching my Kansas City Chiefs play the Oakland Raiders. It was about 10:30, 10:45, about an hour and 15 minutes after the first fire started, the Harris Fire down in the South County out near Potrero. And I wanted to have the company car because it has Union-Tribune on the side of it, which it makes it a lot quicker to get through the police lines. We have the right to do that, but if they don't know you're a media, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So I got up there, and then I had a little car trouble, so I got delayed, which turned out to be fortuitous. I was driving on highway. I went down 67, and I was just gotten to Interstate 8, heading to Potrero, when I saw a little wisp of smoke up in the North County. And I'd been there for the Cedar Fire, and I knew that the potential for that wisp of smoke was huge. And I called up the editor who had sent me down there. And she told me we already had a couple of reporters down at the Harris Fire. I'd be like a third or fourth. We had some photographers. And I said, look, I'm going to go up north. And this woman who was long gone from the paper said, no, you do what I say. And she ordered me to go to the Harris Fire, and I just made a U-turn and went north anyway. Never heard another word about it because it turned out to be the good decision. But I wonder what would have happened if that fire had gone out. Raced up there, so everybody was going the other way, only the fire engines, and we were going that way. Got there really pretty much in the infancy of the Witch Creek Fire, which started near Santa Isabel, and in a forest land. Actually, it was private property, but it was forested. And I can remember they had given us little cameras at this point, but kind of bulky cameras. And at one point, well, first off, I remember coming across the man who was the commander, the initial commander for the Witch Creek Fire, who I knew was a fire chief named Zombro. And he was much too busy to talk to me, but over the roar of a helicopter, he yelled at me, "This is going to be another Cedar Fire." Wow. So I called in, and that all of a sudden got everybody moving downtown real quick, or in Mission Valley real quick. I remember watching it with my camera, putting it on trying to steady it on the car as the winds bent these palm trees all the way to the ground.
Wow.
It was just an amazing thing. And then there were people who were in homes right along this ridge, right along Highway 78, that were, of course, panicking. And it's really tough to interview people when they're afraid of dying. So it's really tough to report it all in the initial parts of a fire because people are just too busy trying to save themselves. That whole afternoon is kind of a blur as the fire kept growing. One strong memory I have is that night. I was at Ramona Airport. The Ramona Fire Station, the main one in town. And at that point, I was on the cell phone, and Christina Davis, another reporter, was with me. We were in the same car, and then in the back seat was a woman whose name I don't even remember now, but she was a very young reporter for KPBS. And we're all talking on our phones, giving stuff to our desks, and on the radio, I think we had Kogo on, and that beep, the emergency alert system, ordering everybody in the town of Ramona to evacuate immediately. Your life is in danger.
Wow.
The woman behind in the back absolutely lost it. She became hysterical. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And we had to calm her down before we could do anything else. Mm-hmm. We knew we were okay because we were in the middle of town and there were fire engines all around us. The Highway 67 at that point was an absolute parking lot. Everybody trying to get out all at once, along with Highway 78. We got left around midnight. It was not long after that a second fire called the Guejito fire, which eventually became combined with the Witch Creek fire, started in the San Pasqual Valley. And that was what really burned into Rancho Bernardo, with the Witch Creek fire kind of following behind and emerging faster than anyone thought it was going to get there, which is why Rancho Bernardo at dawn was ablaze. Can you remember, I had about a couple hours sleep and I started driving around Rancho Bernardo. And it was really surreal. There were a couple streets that had just been completely decimated, but I was in this neighborhood where there would be one house fully engulfed, and then 3 homes that were fine, and then another house that was fully engulfed, and there weren't any firefighters around. It was, not one to be seen. A few cops were around, stopping everybody to make sure, all the media, make sure we weren't looters. But it was just odd because there were no homeowners there. It was an empty. Everybody had evacuated, yet there were these houses all over spotted on fire.
Sounds like a real hellscape.
Something. Yeah, it was really something. I mean, it was especially shocking because it had just happened. I'd watched Scripps Ranch burn like that, and it was just weird to have it all happening again. And, of course, the last 10 years I've been waiting for the next one, and it's never come.
Yeah.
Even though every year I write the story, in the early summer about, conditions are ripe for because the firefighters always say, if it's been a wet winter, well, the grass is going to grow really thick and it's going to get really dry and it's going to be a bad year. Or, it's been really dry this winter, so boy, we're going to get a big fire. So you never know what's going to happen, including this year.
Yeah. So when you talk a little bit about the biggest contributing factors to the blaze, you've already mentioned it's when it rains a lot, it creates a lot more brush, which is more tinder that can be burned. And also Santa Ana winds played a role. Why don't you talk about that for a moment?
Well, the Santa Ana winds are the key to these big firestorms down here in Southern California. They make all the difference. You need the low humidity, higher temperatures, although the temperature isn't as important. It's the low humidity and then the winds. The winds in both 2003 and 2007 were intense. It was, steady. And that first day in 2007, steady winds of 50 mile an hour plus up to 100 mile per hour gusts. I mean, these are hurricane strength winds at times. And at that point, firefighters really can't do a lot other than try to protect each individual home that they're going to, because it's just coming so fast. I mean, I watched that initial first day around, 1:30, 2 o'clock. The fire seeming to run at about 50 to 100 feet a minute down the side of the mountains. I mean, it was fast and terrifying. The winds are the big deal. And no matter how well, no matter how many firefighters you have out there, they're not going to be able to do anything in that situation other than try. It was so windy that the planes were grounded that afternoon.
Wow.
The Harris fire was burning. There was one pilot who had made several runs already on it from the Ramona Air Attack Base down to Potrero, dumping his retardant, coming back. It was on his last return trip to get to reload before they were all grounded that he looked down and he saw the Witch Creek fire starting. He saw the arcing line. It was a 69 kilovolt transmission line. 3 of the fires were started by SDG&E equipment, the Guejito fire included, so it's really kind of one thing. And then the Rice Canyon fire, which burned up in Fallbrook. And that was another memory I remember from Rice Canyon, a couple of days after Rice Canyon went through it, it hit this mobile home park, just wiping it out, about 120 homes. And I went up there, I don't know if it was the next day or the day after, when they had these crews going around just looking for bodies to see if anybody was dead. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like this strange, you didn't want them to find any bodies, but it was just a fascinating thing to watch what was going on. Remember, I don't know if it was, I think it was the third day, going to a place called the Pamo Valley, which is a beautiful valley north of Ramona that at one time was, it's owned by the city of San Diego, the whole valley. One time it was going to be a massive reservoir, but environmental concerns stopped it at the last minute. So it's basically just open land, a few homes, but a lot of cows. And I'd been there a few months earlier for a story, and it was just beautiful. Forest on both the mountains that surround the valley. Got there, and there was not a single blade of grass that was green. There was nothing green. It was all this black moonscape, and it was again, it was just hard to imagine that this is where I'd been just a few months ago, looking at this place. But today it looks great. There's still some burned out, some trees that didn't come back, but by and large, it's amazing how nature returns.
Mm-hmm. So you've spoken a lot about the memories that you've had out there as just acres and acres of San Diego was burning. Is there anything that haunts you from that time?
There are. I kind of tend to have all the fires blend together in my head over the years, because not just the two big firestorms, but there have been, not in that fire that I recall, every time since we can get through police lines, I'll put people who have homes in areas that they can't get to into the car and then drive them to let them see if their house is still standing. And there have been a couple times when it hasn't been. I remember once we drove up, it was in Fallbrook, a long time ago, 15 years ago, and this couple was in the back with another couple. They live next door. Drive up to their house, it's completely gone, and the carcass of their German Shepherd is burning in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And they, of course, freak out. The other couple's house was fine. It hadn't been touched, and it was 50 feet away. It's just amazing. Those kind of things. I don't know about haunting. I mean, it's a scary experience at times, primarily because I'm in a car. I'm usually alone. Firefighters are usually saying, "Get the hell out of here! What are you doing here?" And if the car doesn't start, I'm in a lot of trouble. That's the main concern. I don't get close enough to get burned like some of our photographers. I've seen. There was once when I was absolutely sure one of our photographers had burned to death when I watched this massive thing. This was the Harbison Canyon fire back in '97. But he was fine. He stayed hid under the truck, and then he won all these awards for the fire pictures he got at that moment. So, kind of amazing. And then later, a few days later, there was another fire, the Pumacha fire on Palomar Mountain. What I remember most about that was fire chiefs, in some cases, get really excited at this time, and then they tend to exaggerate. Mm-hmm. I remember the local Palomar volunteer chief telling me that every house on the south side of the mountain had burned to the ground, 30, 40, 50 houses. So we started driving around looking for the damage. We couldn't find any burnt houses. There were maybe 3. It was just, they get really excited. I remember once when I was riding the main, so I was in the office, and this chief telling me, not this chief, another reporter telling me a chief had said that the flames were 500 feet high and moving at 60 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, 500 feet? Isn't that like a skyscraper? Yeah. And no, they don't move quite that fast. But the reason sometimes these homes only will burn just one here and elsewhere in the neighborhood, but others will be just fine, is that what they call brands or hot embers from these fires will fly through the air. They say up to a mile. Some say even longer. And then lay it on a roof or in an eave, go through a filter in an attic and start the house on fire, which is really scary. I live in the middle of Poway. If my house were to burn, 500 would have to burn right around it, but it's possible because we aren't more than 2 blocks away from a place that hasn't burned in 80 years. These things called the Twin Peaks. So it's possible that it can happen with the winds doing just the right thing. Mm-hmm. But that's why it's completely random, and And when there aren't a lot of firefighters around because they were spread out over hundreds of miles of fire, I didn't have much experience with Harris Fire, but that was a huge thing down in Proterra too. I mean, eight people died, I think, or 6 people died. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, what are some of the big lessons that San Diego agencies learned from this experience?
One of the main things they did in reaction to the 2 firestorms was they decided to create essentially a county fire department. Before, it had a few major districts, San Diego, North County Fires, and Rancho Santa Fe, but the rest of the county was protected primarily by volunteer fire departments with dedicated volunteers, but they weren't in the stations. They weren't necessarily in great shape. They weren't particularly well trained. Once we saw twice in these firestorms that fires that start way out in the backcountry can suddenly come all the way into the city, it got everybody's attention. And over the last decade, they've consolidated, basically gotten rid of a lot of the volunteer fire departments, much to the chagrin of the people who are there. I mean, they don't like it, but now they have 15 county stations, mostly of them are new, well equipped, with CAL FIRE firefighters or trainees, people who are working in the stations and are kind of waiting around to get full-time jobs, but they're well trained and they've gone through the academy. There are still a few districts out there like Julian which are resisting. They like their independence. They all like their independence, but most of them don't have it anymore. But I think it's probably made the area a lot safer. CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service is responsible for wildland fire response, and all these. The county department is really more about medical emergencies, but they complement each other. They if there's a fire, both are going to run to it, and whichever one's closer, that sort of thing. So, and the whole idea with any of these fires, there are hundreds of fires every year in the county, and it's about getting on them quick, putting them out before they become even an acre in size. That's why you'll see what is really just a small fire, a couple acres, but you'll see helicopters and tankers coming at it because they're just worried that it's going to get away, especially if the winds pick up. So that, and then SDG&E has done a tremendous amount of improvements to their system. They've replaced thousands of wood poles throughout the backcountry with steel poles, not with the idea primarily that if the fire does come, their poles and their electrical system won't go down. They won't burn up. They also in a lot of places the poles have made the wires further apart so they can't arc together, and they now have new policies in place. The Witch Creek fire was started at this large transmission line. It was an important transmission line, but there had been an indication that there was something wrong with it. It was. They had automatic checks and everything seemed fine, so they turned it back on. Now, if there's an alert, they shut it down until a crew member can go out and visually inspect the line to see what's going on. That's a huge change. They also can turn off the power if the weather indicates that's necessary, that it's just really windy, that there's a chance they'll just shut off the power in parts of the backcountry. But the biggest, the way fires are fought still is pretty much the same. Firefighters with hoses and axes and from the air. What's changed now is all the technology, which makes it they have a lot better way of knowing when things could get bad, or predictive abilities. On top of, I'm trying to remember the exact number, I think it's 170 poles, mostly in the backcountry, power poles, are little weather stations recording humidity, wind, and temperature. And those are relayed every 10 minutes to a command center at SDG&E. Then they combine that information with what they call the fuel moisture level, the brush, which is taken every week all over the county, and the weather forecast. And all fire agencies will get on their smartphones daily alerts about what the danger is that day, what it's going to be in 3 days. And when you hear about they're upstaffing all for this week because of the weather, it's usually because of those alerts. There are also over 100 cameras now on power poles all over the backcountry that will allow them, if they get a report of a fire, they can immediately go and look at the fire and see what the smoke looks like, and they can have a better understanding of, is this something that's important, is this something we need to get out of. they have technology in some of the, like in the spotter plane that kind of controls all the air traffic in the area, the small plane that hovers above everybody else telling them where to hit. They have the camera that senses heat now, and they can see through the smoke. Sometimes before the smoke would obscure exactly where the fire was burning. Now they can tell and then relay that through computers to the chiefs down in the field, and it just makes it a better way of fighting the fires. So technology is great. It's helping a lot.
Yeah. With all of this happening and the fact that we had a heavy winter and there is a lot more brush, isn't a giant fire again, to a certain extent, inevitable?
Oh yeah, I think every firefighter will tell you that it's inevitable. And with these seeming changes in the climate, I mean, it seems to be getting drier and weirder weather, which means more wind at times. Yeah, no, it's inevitable. And of course, we keep building further and further out. The wildland urban interface, they call it, which means houses are next to trees, which is kind of both good and bad, because if you get a development of homes with streets that it may have fire hydrants, it works as a fire break. For instance, the Laguna fire in 1970, which at the time was the biggest in the state history, burned from Mount Laguna all the way into El Cajon and other parts. I think 256 homes, I think that was the number, were burned. If that same footprint of the fire happened today, there'd probably be 10,000 houses. But it wouldn't happen that way, because there would be all these fire breaks, places for firefighters to mount a battle. And there would certainly be a lot more firefighters now, because as what the county says, we're better equipped for firefighting than any other county in America. I don't know if that's provable, but I'm sure it's close, if not true, completely true. I just encourage everyone that lives out in the backcountry or anywhere to clear the brush around their homes and trim those trees back and get the wood piles away from their because firefighters, when they're out there and the fire's burning big, aren't going to be enough of them, and they're going to look at the houses. They'll check every house to make sure there's no one there to save that they need to save. But otherwise, if you got 3 houses and 2 of them haven't done the work, haven't prepared for a fire, and the third one has, they're going to go to that third one, because that's the house they will have the best chance of saving, and the house where they have the best chance of not getting hurt. So, it's to your own good it's for your own good to do the type of clearance and be ready to go, and then have your little kids ready to, if you have to run away fast. We were evacuated during the Witch Creek fire. That was another memory. That was a weird memory. I stayed back with my wife because I kind of knew where the fire was and what it wasn't going to do, but the whole neighborhood was empty, so we had this massive neighborhood at ourselves. I come back like the third day, and there's our National Guards guys with military weapons at every street, blocking our path. Now, it later came out that all those National Guardsmen had weapons that didn't have any ammo in it. It was all just for show, but nobody knew that at the time. So that was a very, very odd thing. Anyway.
Yeah, well, J. Harry Jones, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Earlier this week, UT photographer Howard Lippman interviewed Michelle and Greg Grimaldo, 2 people that survived the Harris fire, but their home was destroyed near Hamul.
Let's go back to that day and leading up to the day. Who wants to tell me about what happened?
It was kind of eerie. We were sleeping. It was the day before the fire. We knew what was going on across the canyon, and we can see it. We can see the glare, we can see the orange glow. And so we're just thinking it's another fire that they're going to knock out, because in the past they had no problem. We'd sit there and watch on our back patio and watch as the planes go over and knock the fire down. Well, come 3 o'clock in the morning, we get a knock on the door, and there's a big old fire truck in our driveway. And we're just totally flabbergasted. We look out the back window, and we notice the fire is very, very close. And what happened was the winds picked up Santa Ana's and started driving that fire. So they kind of lost control of it. But so that was our awakening to the fire actually being close as it was. So they looked around our property, and they told us that we had plenty of clearance. We should be fine, not to worry about it. But unfortunately, like I said, the winds picked up, and it just kept driving and driving that fire closer to our home. And next thing you know, they're saying, it's probably a good idea for you guys to leave. So at that point, we did.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we did. We got the animals out first while the fire was still behind, just in case, so because we had horses and all. So we moved them over to a neighbor's house quite a few miles away, thinking that was going to be okay. So everybody went there as far as animals, and we just kind of waited until we were told we should leave. But really not thinking anything was going to be wrong, because the fire was kind of pushing it away from the house, and we're watching it. And I remember hugging all the firemen and just saying, thank you so much for everything. I know you're trying really hard, and I knew I'd never see them again. I wish I knew who they were so I could say thank you again. But when they said leave, we did. So
had you guys prepared? Did you have a go box and things like that?
We did have our vehicles packed with some things, but
clothes.
At the same time, we're thinking, well, there's still a possibility they can knock it out. So there were still quite a few things that we left behind, but thank God we got out with our lives, and all animals were packed up. Horses were gone, birds and dogs and everything.
Yeah. So when we left here, we went to a neighbor's house that we thought was far enough away, and there were probably about 6 families that went there that day, because they have about 10 acres and they have a horse facility, so that's where we kind of went. And so we went there, and exhausted, fell asleep, but we were awakened in the middle of the night with somebody running down the hallway just saying, you got to get up, get up, get up, we have to get out. And we're like, what? And looked out the window, and the fire was on the hill there. And there was only one way out. There's only a one-way dirt road down to the Honey Springs, the main road. And my mother was not able to move around too quickly, so my husband told my mother and I to just load up some of the animals and get down the road. So we took off first, and he stayed to help try to get everybody else out and the animals. And
they have a horse facility, so they had 30 horses there.
30 horses.
They had to get out.
Yeah.
So we stayed behind to evacuate the horses.
Yeah. And still not thinking it was that bad, but as we're coming down, the fire chief is coming up that road, and he's like, what are you doing here? And we're like, trying to get out. We didn't know what was going on, I didn't hear anything, and he told us to get to the fire department. And so I told him there were other people up there and horses, and he was going up there to see what he could do. And as we got to the road of Honey Springs at the end of this dirt road, there was a fire truck sitting there, but the fire was at the road already. And I just told that fire guy, the fireman, I said, we were told to get to the fire department, which was to the right. And we start to go to the fire department, and the flames are now jumping over the car to the other side of the road as we're driving. And I remember getting to the fire department, and they said the best thing we should do is just go park in the middle of the road. I'm like, what? And so we did. My mother parked behind me, and now the flames are jumping. I'm on the phone screaming at him, get out. Just let the horses go and get out. It's jumped the road, and it's coming your way. And at that point, I just thought, that's it. This is it. And my mother and I got out of the car and hugged each other and said we loved each other and thought, that's it, boy. And what seemed like forever, all of a sudden he comes pulled up behind us with a load of horses. And he had looked around. There was a big clearing in a field by the fire department. And he said, that's where we're going to park. Let's go park there. So we did, and it was for hours. We sat there in the fire. We had gone all the way around us on all sides, jumped the road, and we're watching everything burn in front of us, and just sat there thinking, are we going to get through it? We didn't know. But I remember a couple of hours into everything, just before the sun started coming up, a fire department water tanker came, 2 of them, I believe, yeah. Mm-hmm. And they kind of pulled right around us, and I thought the cavalry just arrived. And I thought, if nothing else, they could douse us down with water if it got any worse. And finally morning came, and everything was burned all around us. But at that point, they told us we could start to drive down the mountain. And that's what we did. We drove down the mountain to another friend's house. Mm-hmm. And that was down by Still Canyon High School. That's a long way away from here. The next day, the fire's there. And that's when I told him, if we have to move one more time, we're just going to go to the ocean, sit in the water. I didn't know where else to go. So that was it was pretty intense, and I'll just never forget it.
We had evacuated our horses from here as well, and to the Ivanhoe Ranch down in Rancho San Diego, Spring Valley. And so we had gone there that morning to check on the horses and make sure everything was okay. Well, it was at that point where I received a phone call from our local sheriff here, and he told us that our house had made it through the fire, and we were fine, and that our neighbors were looking pretty good. So we were pretty satisfied with that, and happy to hear that, of course. Unfortunately, the next day he called us back, and he said that the winds had changed direction, and it picked up again, and unfortunately it took our house. So he wasn't happy about having to deliver that news, and it was devastating news to us. But it doesn't really hit you until you pull up that driveway and see nothing there. Ruins, all black, and all your possessions gone, which ultimately don't really mean a thing. You got out with your life and your animals, which is very important. We did lose some things. There's a few pictures that we lost.
There's a lot that we lost. You're being nice. I don't care.
But,
but I mean, even to this day, we'll say, "Oh, we have so and so." Oh yeah, no, we lost that in the fire. So.
And as we said before, years past, we would sit and watch the fires, and like people watch them on TV, and you think what the devastation, how devastated the people must be that lost their homes or family members, and you really you can't appreciate it until you've gone through it yourself, and it's a truly humbling experience. As I said, once you walk on your property and see nothing gone, and it takes a few days for it to sink in. Michelle had a really tough time with it.
I did. I woke up every morning and I woke up crying. But then finally one day, and for anybody who's watching this going through those fires too, one day I just woke up and I said, there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it. Pick up yourself, get yourself together, and you got to move on. And at that point, the healing started. But you've got to go through those emotions.
So why did you come back, going through all of that? What drew you back here?
The people, the area, the community, the people. We've never lived in a community like this where, we lived in the city where you just didn't even know your next door neighbor. Nobody really takes the time to get to know somebody. But out here, everybody knows everybody. We now have a community page. If there's a billow of smoke, somebody has a picture on there. Does anybody see this? And everybody's reacting to it and knows. And everybody helps everybody, and nobody hesitates. And it's just, the people are beautiful, I couldn't imagine anywhere else.
Yeah, the people, the community, it's truly an experience to live out here. We have friends and neighbors that come out here, and the first thing they say when they get out of their car is, wow, you live really far. But then they get out and they look and they see the view and the gorgeous, it's quiet, and if it's at night, you can see the stars at night. And they say, look at all the stars, it's amazing. You guys have a wonderful place out here. So we do, and we love it. It's our little piece of heaven out here.
We'll be right back.
Right before our eyes, rapidly rising numbers of people are living and dying on our sidewalks, parks, and canyons. Something is deeply wrong. Join us for a free public forum on the homeless crisis in San Diego. Find out what's being done, what works, and what's next. The event takes place on Wednesday, October 25th from 6 to 7:30 at Balboa Theater at 868 4th Avenue. To reserve your seat, go to SanDiegoUnionTribune.com/helpthehomeless. That's SanDiegoUnionTribune.com/helpthehomeless.
We have Enterprise reporter Peter Rowe in the studio. Peter, why don't you say hi?
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. And this is something that is truly deep in the memories of most San Diegans. But San Diego is a place with a lot of new people who maybe haven't experienced these amazing fires. Why don't you walk us through just the basic conditions that caused these major fires to happen a decade ago?
Sure. I think one of the challenges in writing the story was realizing that a lot of people in our audience weren't here. I mean, even though it was only 10 years ago, a lot of people weren't here. They don't understand how apocalyptic this was. It was one of the most terrifying things I've ever been through. And I think most people who were here at the time will nod their heads and say, yeah, I mean, it did seem like the end of the world. I mean, part of that is because of the sheer duration of it. It began on a Sunday morning. It was October 21st, and it didn't end. The last fire wasn't put out until November 16th. It happened all over the county. It was like there was no escape. So it began down by the border, but soon there were fires in Fallbrook. There were fires on Camp Pendleton. There were fires, threatening Palomar Mountain, Escondido, Poway, down into Rancho Bernardo. Julian, I mean, there was a day where firefighters made a stand to see if they could save, the historic downtown core of Julian. And for a while there, it was nip and tuck. It looked like maybe they weren't going to be able to, and that it would all burn down. So you'd ask for some figures. The total number of acres burned are, and I've got it right here, 368,316. Now, that doesn't mean anything to me because I don't own acres.
Who even thinks in acres? It's a bad unit.
I know. Okay, so let's look at it a different way. The total area burned was greater than the entire city limit of Los Angeles.
Wow.
Of Los Angeles. It was greater than the entire city limit of New York, Chicago. I mean, almost any large city you think of, it was larger than that. It was amazing. The number of people who had to evacuate was greater than the number of people who evacuated from Hurricane Katrina. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this was a disaster on a national scale. We had photographs that we published that showed they were satellite images of Southern California, and they just showed this plume of smoke, almost covering the entire county, going out into space. It was huge.
Mm-hmm. It's really crazy to think how truly big these fires are and how fast they move.
Yeah.
So why don't you walk us through the responses from agencies to help quell these flames?
Well, part of the thrust of the story here is about what happened, but part of it is what happened then, what happened afterwards, how they responded. So at the time, there were a number of weaknesses that were kind of exposed by the fire. One weakness was there was a great deal of reliance of aerial coverage of helicopters that could come and drop either fire retardant or water on the fires. And yet there was a policy at the time that CAL FIRE and the California Department of Forestry would not send their helicopters up into the air after sundown. Just that's it. Sundown, they can't go up anymore. There are a fair, squadron worth of helicopters that could be used for this that are at Miramar, that are Marine Corps helicopters, that are Navy helicopters. There was no agreement in place to use them. And so even though people could see that this was a resource that could have been used, wasn't used. So since 2007, the policy has been changed on nighttime flying, and the policy has been changed regarding the military. The military now have a contract with the city and county where they can be used for this. But it involved, thousands of firefighters who did work, in some cases, 72 hours without a break. There were, I think, 10 people who died, but there were hundreds who were burned. There were 22 alone flown out, airlifted from one of the fire stations in the backcountry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for San Diego, what was the biggest lesson that we learned from these fires?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask, but a number of folks have told me that the biggest lesson that we learned was wildfires are as old as civilization or older, right? But in the past, wildfires were regarded by people who live in mid-city, like myself, as something that happens out there. Right. It doesn't really bother me. It doesn't affect me. I mean, my heart goes out to those people, but it's not part of my life. Now it is. Now we have seen from the 2003 wildfires that were just about as devastating, and the 2007 wildfires, we've seen that the fires that start in the backcountry can move into suburban and urban neighborhoods. And part of that is a peculiarity of San Diego and its topography. There are many urban neighborhoods, especially in mid-city, that have canyons that run through them. And, it's nice to have your house back up to a beautiful canyon. But those are great avenues for wildfire to come in. So we all kind of had it brought home to us that it's not a problem just for one part of the county. It's a problem for the entire county.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a survey done just this week which asked how prepared San Diegans felt for emergencies like these. Some of these findings were somewhat disheartening. Why don't you talk about that survey a little bit?
Yeah, it was interesting. The survey kind of repeated some of the questions that were asked immediately after the 2007 fire. So in 2007, when people were asked, hey, are you prepared to leave your home within 15 minutes? It was about 3/4 said yes, we could do it. Asked today, it was 1/2, so it really dropped off. There's also a drop-off in the number of folks who said they had an emergency plan. In 2007, it was 50%, so half of us. And just recently, it was, I think, 38%. So it had dropped quite a bit. So I did talk to Rancho Bernardo resident who lost 2 homes in the fires in 2007. And he says when he talks to his neighbors, that's kind of the attitude he gets is, well, that's yesterday's news. And who really cares? But he said, this is kind of the opposite of lightning. It can strike twice. It can strike twice in the same spot. And in fact, if you've been burned out once, that is an indication that you're living, in a high-risk fire area.
So were any building codes changed to help prevent this from happening?
Yeah, actually, immediately after this, the county changed some building codes. Exteriors can't have exposed wood. The roofs, it used to be very common to see shake shingle roofs, especially if you grew up like I did in the 60s and 70s. They were all over the place.
What's shake shingle?
Shake shingle is a composite wood material that's shingled.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Anyway, and it could look kind of nice. Sometimes it look kind of tacky. But at any rate, burned like crazy. So basically, you can't have that anymore when you're building a new house, right? So instead, you have to have something that's not flammable. Same thing with the exterior walls. You're supposed to have 100 feet of defensible space around your house. Defensible space doesn't mean just dirt. It can be plants that are kind of fire resistant. You have to cut your trees back. Cut back dead trees, get rid of dead wood. If you, like a lot of us, buy firewood, right, in the winter, crazy, but we do this in San Diego.
It's so cold.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So, and if you stack it up against your home, like a lot of us, like I do, that's bad. You're not supposed to be doing that. So there were a lot of things that went into effect. New homes, not only did they have to have these exteriors that were sort of fire resistant, they had interior sprinkler systems installed just like we have in modern office buildings like this one. So a lot of things changed, and apparently we are better off today than we were in 2007. But what's worrying the fire professionals is that wildfires are becoming more common and more deadly. And this is international. It's not just here in San Diego or here in California. Of course, we're all watching these fires in Sonoma and Napa County and also down in, I think, Anaheim Hills. But it's happening in other parts of the world. One of the guys I talked to went out to investigate the 2009 fires, I believe they were, in Australia, which were extremely, extremely deadly, killed hundreds of people. And often what happens is people wait too long because the fires are moving so quickly. They think they have more time than they do. By the time they get going, it's too late. They're faced with bad options like, do I stay, shelter in place? If your house isn't really that fireproof, then that's probably a bad decision. But if you hop in the car, then often, he said he saw dozens of bodies, of people who were trapped in their cars and burned alive. Portugal had historic wildfires this year. It's not a problem that's geographically limited to us.
Mm-hmm. And also, why don't you talk a little bit about what you did 10 years ago at the UT? What was it like here?
It was scary. I was living then where I live now in Kensington. Kensington was not near the fires. We were miles away, and yet when I'd come out in the morning, there would be ash, on the front yard, ash on top of the car. You had this fine, powdery, gray thing over everything. You could smell the fire, just miles away. You could smell this kind of acrid, unpleasant aroma. Interstate 15 was shut down for a large chunk of this time. And so you just had this sense that kind of the world was kind of closing in on you. Mm-hmm. I was kind of put on rewrite. I rewrote a lot of the stories that were coming in from reporters. The entire newsroom was mobilized. Photo did a heroic job. Photo captured just some amazing images, daytime, nighttime, aerial, on the ground, that really kind of told the story. Well, again, to go back to that whole issue of what can you do and should you do anything, I talked to people from San Diego City Fire, San Diego Fire Department, from CAL FIRE. I talked to people in Colorado who are organizing what are called fire-resistant communities. And the message was always the same. It's like, well, don't be complacent. Do what you can do. The other thing, in terms of what you can do personally, one of the things that surprised me was a number of folks, including the fire chief here, said one of the most important things you can do is to know your neighbors, which a lot of us don't. I mean, we're working long hours. We come home. We don't see these people. But he said, do you know if your neighbors have children? Are the children at home? Do you know if they have maybe a grandparent living with them? Is grandma at home? So if there is a fire and you are evacuating, the neighbors next door, they need to take some special provisions for an elderly person who might be confused or maybe isn't moving that quickly. Same thing with children, who may not know what's going on, maybe a little bit out of control. So just to be a good neighbor and act, and kind of help save them too.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, thank you so much.
Hey, pleasure.
We'll be right back.
Every Wednesday, check out
America's Finest Fantasy Football podcast, and we're on Facebook Live. Eddie Brown, Union-Tribune's fantasy expert. You know him because you read him.
To me, fantasy sports has always been about we hacked our favorite game and created another game, and now we're enjoying it.
Kevin Acey, sports columnist, and I'm learning fantasy football.
Waiver wire is like digging for gold. You're out there just randomly digging for gold, and if you can come up with something, that's great. To me, trade is like targeting gold. You know exactly where that gold is, and you want to go get it. America's finest fantasy football, every Wednesday.
As we stand here today, we are recognizing the anniversary, the 10-year anniversary of the Harris, the Witch, and the other fires in San Diego County. 580 square miles were burned. 7 people lost their lives, and hundreds of homes and property was damaged. But today, we're going to talk about what has changed since 2007, and a lot has changed.
We are all in this together. That is our very clear message this morning, because we need every San Diego to help join us in that effort of being prepared. Everyone should have an emergency plan for themselves and for their families. You never know when you're going to need it, and you hope you don't need it. But having a plan in place can make the difference between life and death.
This new survey that was done by the Office of Emergency Services finds that only half of residents are prepared to evacuate their homes within 15 minutes. That's compared to 74% just a decade ago. That's not good news. So what I'm asking for people today to do is to be prepared, and preparedness starts with all of us. So I urge folks to go to readysandiego.org, put together that disaster plan and emergency supplies. Sign up for Alert San Diego. What I'm asking could save a life, and that life might be yours or your family's or a neighbor or a friend.
My concern is that the general public still looks on us first responders as Plan A. We will never be your Plan A. We are the Plan B. The Plan A needs to be homeowners surviving on their own.
That was San Diego County Supervisor Diane Jacobs, San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, and CAL FIRE Unit Chief Tony Meacham. In addition to following the San Diego Union-Tribune for news alerts, consider following CAL FIRE on your social media. Those updates might save your life. If you're a homeowner, create and keep a 30-foot area around your home that is free of anything that could burn. Maintain your plants so they don't become kindling. Keep an emergency kit in your home and in your vehicle just in case you have to evacuate. Stay in touch with local news sources and authorities to make sure you only return to your home when it is safe. Refocus is a production of the San Diego Union-Tribune. This episode was produced by Lauren Flynn and myself, Daniel Wheaton. Keep an eye out for Refocus on your podcast feed, and please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. For Refocus, I'm Daniel Wheaton.